to the 2021 video companion of my column for the NFDA Director magazine entitled Finance 201. What? You thought it was Finance 101? No. It changed. Why did it change? Because after a decade, you've graduated. Congratulations. This year, we're going to be on to more advanced work. This column is going to evolve. It's going to go from a monologue where I tell you what to do to a dialogue where I interview others who are doing it and have done it successfully. We're going to help you learn by watching others. The written column is typically about 1,500 to 2,000 words, and that is just not enough space to get all of the content communicated to you. So, we're going to have this video companion. So as I interview people, we're going to be recording those interviews and then putting them into this video compartment. In the event you wake up and you realize, gee, this is on YouTube, well then let's do what you do on YouTube. Click to subscribe. That way you're going to know every time we post. Give us a thumbs up if we're doing good. That lets me know that you like what we're doing. This column, the January 2021 column of Finance 201, is about surviving the pandemic. What changes do you have to bring to your business to win safely, and to keep serving families with honor and dignity? In order to do this, I've interviewed two people this month. One, Jeffrey Wages. Jeffrey is the owner of Wages & Sons Funeral Home in the Atlanta area. In addition, Jeffrey has a cremation society and a trade cremation business. I've also interviewed my business partner, Chris Kruger. Chris is the COO of the Foresight Companies, and Chris is going to talk about how and what we've learned from our 2020 consumer attitude study that Foresight sponsored along with SoCal Marketing, interviewing more than 2,500 people throughout the United States. In case you haven't noticed, COVID-19 and the pandemic that it has brought on has changed everything about the funeral and cemetery business. It changed the quantity of deaths, how consumers use funeral homes and cemeteries. It also changed how professionals provide for consumers, and more importantly, the business model. What we're going to explore today with Jeff and Chris is how you need to change your business model and your service offerings to win. One of the things that's changing in our business is the gatherings. You can call them a wake, a funeral, and calling hours, whatever you want. But the bottom line is, consumers are either forbidden by state law or just out and out afraid to gather. As important as it is for people to come together, to share their grief, to support each other, and be able to touch during this time, it's not happening. And because of that, your business model is changing, your staff is changing, and the way you do what you do has to change. Today, as I talk with Jeff Wages, we're going to talk about the operator's perspective, the guy with the boots on the ground, and what he has done to try to focus his staff on serving families as effectively as possible. Jeffrey Wages, welcome to Finance 201.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Jeff, this month's issue is dealing with returning to the new normal. COVID-19 has changed everything. But before we get into some of your thoughts on that, tell me a little bit about how you came into funeral service.
My father was Billy Wages, and he started in the funeral service business at a very young age. As I grew up, I began to have an admiration for the business and began working alongside him at the age of 13 years old, and made it through mortuary school, and have been lucky enough to have stayed in this business now for pushing 40, a little over 40 years, actually.
Jeff, it's great, and I appreciate you meeting with us on a casual day. Not a lot of days you're out of your suit and tie. So when you think about Stone Mountain, Georgia, and Lawrenceville, Georgia, you've also seen a lot of the funeral world because of the volunteering that you've done with organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I served as president of OGR, the International Order of the Golden Rule. I was president of FAMIC for 1 year as well. And you know, this pandemic has certainly changed the industry, and I think it's probably changed it ongoing.
For our viewers that aren't familiar with FAMIC, FAMIC is the Funeral and Memorial Association that covers florists, cemeteries, and everyone.
Burial vaults, all of the monument builders, and so forth.
Yeah, so you've seen this business not just from the small town that you work in, but from a global basis.
Correct.
Okay. Jeff, with COVID-19 changing the way people gather, mourn, the rate of death, the risk of infection to funeral operators, tell me a little bit about what changes you've had to make in your business for the sake of your clientele.
Well, of course, you know, all of the universal precautions that we have always practiced, you know, back in the 80s, you know, we still practice those same universal precautions. The downside is it's brought it into the people who are coming into the front door of your business, not the back door so much. So now you're dealing with families who've had a death from COVID. You've got all the family members potentially have COVID. And, you know, it's just adjusting, making your facility, make your facility in such a way that you can actually serve those families where they can memorialize their loved ones as normal as possible during these times.
What are some of those changes that you've tried to implement to help people be able to go through the funeral process and memorialize their loved ones?
Well, we've actually opened up some of our rooms. We've actually taken some of the divider walls out. We've actually taken our selection room completely out, turned it into a multi-purpose room, which has worked out well because, you know, when you have a 1,400, 1,500 square foot selection room and only 35 or 40% of your families are going in there, it doesn't make a lot of sense to utilize that for caskets. So we took that out, and we've been able to spread the families amongst our building in such a way that they can all have a nice gathering, even if we have multiple services at once, and still not intermingle.
Jeff, how has that impacted the financial structure of funeral arrangements? Has it changed your prices or any of your costs of operation?
The biggest thing that has changed is, you know, families are now not doing embalming in a lot of situations. Even if they're burying, they're opting for 1-day services, no visitations the day before, all at one time, maybe a couple of hours in the chapel or one of our staterooms, or just going directly to the graveside. So it's impacted us. It's impacted our revenue stream on several of our line items. We've not adjusted our prices to overcome those differences at this point, but it definitely has impacted us from a financial perspective.
So I'm not trying to be crude about this, but obviously talking to peers as you are now, revenue is down, overhead is about the same. There's only one thing that can shift, and that's profit. How do you adapt to that?
Well, it kind of starts at the top with that. So we've adjusted some of our top salaried employees and adjusted those a little bit. But one thing that has, with the shortage of, or the difference in the revenue stream, we have seen a slight increase in our business at our boutique and our budget operations. So some of that decline in revenue has been offset just a little with an increase in volume.
With the two levels of business you have, the wages and son, and then the direct value focused disposal business.
Correct.
Are you seeing any changes in your direct disposal or your value focused business?
We're feeing an increase in that business, a significant increase in that business, and fewer people are wanting to come into the facility. I mean, so they're wanting these documents emailed, or they want the documents sent to them and they courier them back, or it's just that human funeral director personal interaction. Most people are trying to avoid that at all costs.
Are any of your funeral directors feeling less appreciated because of the lessening human interaction?
We've not seen that. I actually think it may be just quite the opposite, because those people who are having services and those people who are experiencing deaths from their loved ones dying from COVID, I think there's a little more appreciation for the fact of, how we're moving through the process, taking them through the steps that is honoring their loved one, helping them mourn and give them what they need without being, too mandated by, okay, well, you can only, you're not going to be able to do this, you can't do that. It seems like we're getting a little bit better reviews actually from those families because of the extra care that we're having to give them.
Jeff, I do appreciate you taking time to meet with me today while you're obviously on a day off. But the one question I do like to ask everyone I've ever interviewed is this: what are the key steps that you think funeral homes are going to have to do so as to be profitable and relevant into the future?
I think we are going to have to try to do a better job of explaining to families how important it is to honor their loved ones through this, because I think that there's going to be a certain number of people who, when Uncle John passed away from COVID and they forego the visitation and the funeral ceremony, go straight to the graveside, they say, oh, that worked for Uncle Joe. Then when Aunt Sally passes away, they say, we'll just do the same thing. And I think that the adjustment in their pricing structure is one thing that we're going to have to look at. But really training the consumer, re-educating the consumer on that value of service. One of the saddest things that we've had through this entire process with the COVID deaths is the families that feel like their loved ones hasn't been recognized, and it's really sad. We've had several families who I've dealt with who just said, I don't feel like we we've had a death because we haven't mourned the loss. And although we have him and the cemeteries or in a urn, they still just don't have the feeling that they've really celebrated that life. So re-educating consumers down the road, I think, will be very important.
Jeffrey, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome, my friend.
My next guest on Finance 201 is Chris Kruger. Chris, welcome to the NFDA news magazine, if you will.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for anyone that doesn't understand, in complete disclosure, Chris and I happen to be business partners. And we both are some of the ownership team of the Foresight Companies. But I don't want the fact that I know Chris to be a negative. I want it to be a very strong positive. So Chris, for the sake of the audience, could you give a short background, a short biography, if you will, of your background in and around funeral service?
Certainly. Thanks, Dan. As you just said, you and I have been partners in this endeavor at Foresight for the past couple of years. But I began my journey in funeral service about 25 years ago. About half of that was with SCI. I worked in corporate development, real estate, construction, and operations. Quite a bit in North America, but also abroad as well. So in that time frame, I've had the benefit and the blessing to work with literally thousands of different funeral and cemetery locations around the US, Canada, and abroad. The last couple of years have been with Foresight, but in my window between working with SCI and Foresight, I also maintained quite a bit of relationships with some of the bigger independent operators around North America, and some of my very dearest friends in the world have always been in this industry.
Chris, in March of 2020, you came up with the idea of creating a survey to consumers to basically ask them how funeral service is changing in light of a pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about what the survey was intended to show?
What it was intended to show was a little bit of a guess at the time, right? So, we conducted a study with the help of the SoCal Approach Group in early May. And we ultimately released the findings of that to the profession in early June. Now, the study was designed to understand consumer attitudes in 3 specific times: pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, during COVID, and what we thought at the time was going to be post-COVID. Obviously, as time has evolved, we're obviously not quite out of the woods, so to speak. But the study was really designed and to really target what those consumer attitudes and those preferences were coming out of the COVID pandemic. And as you think back in time, back around early May into June, that's when we were just coming out of the initial shelter in places and the quarantines. And we were all sort of adjusting to what we thought at the time was a new norm. So as we looked around in funeral service, we really wanted to know is, what was that going to be? And what for our profession, as we were trying to serve families in this incredibly difficult time, what was it that the consumer was looking for? Plain and simple.
Chris, this month's issue focuses on trying to get back to a new normal, amending the business, amending your operations on all levels. What are some of the key takeaways that your survey presented to you based upon the consumer's answers?
There were really 3 primary takeaways, but they were profound. And what it really said, or what we were really, the findings really told us, was that the industry has undergone a dramatic shift, a dramatic transformation. Things have changed and they're not going back. The 3 primary takeaways were around transparency, technology, and physical attendance. And physical attendance really meaning not only how we plan, but how we participate and how we celebrate in this industry.
Chris, let's take these one at a time. Let's talk about transparency and price transparency. at that. What did the consumers tell you they expect funeral service to do to win over their trust and their business?
You know, the first thing that's quite interesting about transparency, transparency is more about education and value rather than all about being about price. 75% of all consumers expect to be able to find pricing online. And probably even more profound than just that is that 56% of all consumers say that they will only do business with firms that make pricing available online.
That's a remarkable statistic, especially for an industry that has not wanted to move into the price transparency area.
It's a staggering statistic. And what it tells you, what's most important about that is it's about the value proposition. And the consumer, as I said earlier, they're not as concerned necessarily about price, but it's more focused on value. And it's how do you communicate that value to the consumer in that first opportunity, the first touch point that you have with that consumer.
Chris, the second point that you mentioned was the use of technology. Now, in my lifetime in this business, I found funeral service hates technology. The last technology this industry universally accepted was gravity. So what do you think technology needs to do to help bridge the gap with consumers?
You know, the interesting thing is, virtually all of the findings that we have revolve in some way, shape, or form around technology, and it's affecting the consumer experience on every level. The funeral industry is easily 20 plus years behind the times. Now, the interesting thing is that these technologies that are being suggested by the consumer, these aren't new. This isn't some massive seismic shift in the world. But the consumer is demanding different things and different options from our profession. You know, everything from how the consumer finds a provider, how they're educated, and ultimately how they interact with the consumer up to and through the service is rapidly shifting to technology solutions.
Chris, are you finding this did the consumers respond that this was more of a funeral issue, a cemetery issue, or combined?
It was combined. I think if you look, when we get into the statistics, what you find is the consumer has evolved in adapting to their daily lives, and they're expecting that to be a part of their experience when interacting with the funeral and the cemetery profession. The third thing that I mentioned was physical attendance. Pre-pandemic, 42% of consumers felt strongly about attending a funeral in person. That number declines to 26% post-pandemic. Now, 43%, it's about half. You're exactly right. 43% of consumers believe that they can show how much they care by simply attending the live stream of a funeral home. Now, that number is up 72% from the pre-pandemic levels. Now, 40% of consumers are now expecting live streaming to be a part of to be available permanently. You know, and so that speaks quite a bit to how people participate in the service, but equally, if not more telling for our profession is that 46% of all consumers would choose to make their arrangements virtually. Now, that's a combination of both pre-need and at-need. And when you look at it purely in pre-need, in pre-planning, that number is north of 50%.
Those are seismic shifts in the way funeral homes are going to need to serve consumers during the pandemic and post-pandemic. Chris, I am curious, we're looking at added costs, changes in the way consumers are interacting with funeral homes. How are funeral homes going to be able to pay for this when gatherings are down, revenue per call is impaired, a slight degree of cremation has become more direct disposal because they don't gather? How are they going to be able to pay for this?
Well, the first thing they shouldn't do is stick their head in the sand. you need to have a clear written plan. You need to create a value proposition. You constantly have to be refining it to the outside world. You got to make sure that your pricing is right. And that's an ongoing process. You got to make sure that your pricing is focused on the services and the items that the consumer is looking for. You know, in a world of technology, transparency, and an educated consumer, you typically got one shot and you can't waste it. You know, it's imperative that you listen to what the consumer wants and give them a double portion of it. It's equally as important to understand what the consumer doesn't want and remove the obstacles. The key here is to listen to the consumer. You have to go back and remember, they're not telling us they don't want to spend the money, but they are telling us 44% of consumers are telling us they don't see the value in spending a whole heck of a lot of money on a casket. They want to spend it on celebrating on their loved ones and doing it their way. And a big component of that is centered around technology. It's about convenience, and it's about making the customer experience making it more simple.
Chris, I know that the NFDA Director Magazine has published articles on this survey. A number of periodicals have covered press releases. You have a webinar on your website, as well as the white papers that you're rolling out. What are the white papers?
Well, so far we've completed 2 white papers. One is around transparency and one is around technology, and we're working on a couple of more. And what that really is, it's a deep dive into those topics. So they are, while we can gloss over a number of very compelling and very profound statistics, the white papers dig much deeper into what is the relevance and how is it going to impact the profession, and to the people that are reading them, how is it going to impact their lives, and what are the shifts and the changes they need to make in order to make sure that they're not left behind.
It's about winning.
There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And the goal here is to be winners. You know, I've said this before, and I believe, you know, we're at a dramatically different point in time in November, December of this year than we were back in June. You know, we all thought we had we saw the end was near. And there've been a lot of people that have been very successful and succeeded through this pandemic. I like to think that somewhere in the neighborhood of a third have been thriving. About a third have been kind of rolling with the punches and making things work. And a third have been frozen and really paralyzed with fear. And the people that are listening to the consumer, the people that are adapting and shifting and changing the way they're doing things, are the ones that are winning. And you said it spot on, Dan. It's about winning and avoiding falling into the pitfalls that many others are encountering.
Chris, one question I'd like to ask my guests, everyone that I've interviewed, is this: what do you think the key steps are for funeral service to do so that they can be profitable and relevant in the future?
I would say that the first thing that you need to do, again, is have a plan. Second thing you need to do is you need to listen to the consumer and to be flexible and to be nimble and make changes. You have one shot at interacting with the consumer these days, and technology is a big part of it. And you need to make your value proposition known to the consumer. You have to control your expenses and be flexible as you navigate the waters day to day, month to month, quarter to quarter.
My guest has been Chris Kruger, Chief Operating Officer of the Foresight Companies. Chris, thank you. Stay safe.
Thanks, Dan.
So what did we learn? We learned from Jeff that you have to train your staff because they are the ones training your families. You have to make sure your staff understands how to be safe and how to keep families safe during this time. That you get to choose how your overhead and profit are going to be managed. While you may have additional calls, you're going to have additional costs. From Chris, we learned really three things. Transparency of pricing is critical. Families expect to know. Technology is the second most important thing. Families want you to invest in technology, but they don't expect to pay for more technology any more than they pay to listen to your sound system. So you have to be prepared to amend your business and provide the best quality service that you can. I want to thank Jeff and Chris for participating with this January 2021 column of Finance 201. I want to thank Julie McAfee, my producer, who helps make this a reality. Again, I'm going to ask you, if you have questions, send me an email. If you like it, click it. And please subscribe. Let us build an audience that can really help you be educated throughout the year. Finance 201. Uncut and uncensored, so that way you can win.